Cross is the face of the moon. The Earth's, let's just say the moon's position relative to the Earth and Sun. Wow, I spread that word out. The E-Earth.
No,
the E-Earth.
The E is just the sun, and the E is the sun, and the A is quite literally like the moon.
All right, so here's the sun.
It's a half circle now. Whoa.
So there's the sun. Here's the Earth. And here's the moon. So the moon has different phases. So the back side of the moon is always the dark side. That's when I say back, I mean the side that is facing away from the sun. So there's always part of the sun, of the moon, that's dark. So this would be a full moon because you're seeing only the lit up part. This would be a quarter moon because obviously you're seeing half of the light from the moon. It's called a quarter because you're seeing 1/4 of the moon. You can't see the far side. Oh my gosh. Because it won't stay. It has to be balanced in the middle to turn these off. It used to not be like that, and then something happened. I don't know what. Quarter moon, and then a new moon.
How do people distinguish what's first and what's third?
I'm not worried about that. I'm not going to make you do that. Going from full to quarter is third. Going from new to quarter is first. So I think of it as 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's talk about what Josh was saying. Let's talk about eclipses. So for eclipses, here's the sun. Here's the Earth. The moon does not sit in a flat plane. The moon orbits kind of like around like this. Okay? The moon isn't directly on the other side. But the moon's orbit is kind of tilted, and so it doesn't always, sometimes it is actually directly in line. Like if it was right here, it would be directly in line with the Earth. And so depending on where we are in its orbit, sometimes the moon or the Earth gets in the way. And so a solar eclipse is when the moon gets between the Earth and the sun. And the moon is the exact right distance away and is the exact right size to do something really, really cool. And that is to completely cover up the sun.
Why are you not supposed to look at an eclipse?
Because
the sun right after will blind you.
Because it doesn't last for very long. And so while it's covered up, you can look at it. But it's only covered up completely for about 8 minutes. And the right before and the right after is bright enough to blind you, just like staring at the sun any other time.
I was like, I've looked at the sun before. Have you ever like stared right at the sun?
Yeah, I've done it.
How did that treat you?
That was my favorite game. I mean, you see a spot for a while.
I still got perfect vision, and I've stared at it like 20 times on occasion.
Yes. Quiet, guys.
Why is it when it eclipses? You said it's like blindly bright, but it's before and after.
Yeah.
Is it like brighter than when the sun's on?
It's not brighter when the sun is. But, one, your eyes aren't used to it being as bright because it's getting dimmer. and two, even just a tiny bit of the sun is still too much for you to look at. It has to be completely covered. Yeah, Riley.
For like a crescent moon, where would that like?
So crescent moons are in between the quarters and the new moon. So going from a third quarter to a new moon is called a waning crescent, and going from a new moon to a quarter moon is called a waxing crescent. In between the quarters and the full moon are called gibbous moons. There's a waxing gibbous and a waning gibbous. So here's kind of what you would expect it to look like. You can see the moon starts covering up the sun until it completely covers it up, and that's called totality. A number of years ago, we actually had one of these back in the United States in 2017.
Yeah, I got you.
I know, appreciate it. So a lunar eclipse, the Earth gets between the sun and the moon.
These happen like way more frequently.
Yes, these happen more often, and they don't happen in the same way. So the Earth is not the right size and distance away from the moon to completely cover up the sun. And so in a lunar eclipse, you can see a lot more. I think this is the one. There we go. So you can see it's kind of covering up. Now you can still see the moon, right? It's still partially visible, and it's a lot redder because it's the very edge of the light from the sun, and that light tends to be redder wavelengths. So you can still see it, but it is much, much, much dimmer, and that's because you're seeing Earth's shadow. So you're seeing Earth's shadow over the moon. So kind of a cool thing to see.
Isn't there something that also happens kind of like this, where the moon is in line with Mars and some of that gets reflected? Crazy.
You mean, is that why it's red?
No, I'm saying, isn't there a situation where that can happen?
There might be. I'd have to look. It doesn't ring off the top of my head. Yeah, cool.
What do eclipses happen? Like, is every so years?
So solar eclipses only happen every couple of years. They don't happen very often. And they usually don't happen this far north. They usually happen more in the equator region and that sort of area. So they happen maybe every 7 years or something like that. Lunar eclipses happen more often. Lunar eclipses, there will usually be a couple a year. They're not always, you can't always see them all the time from where you are, just depending on where your positioning is. But you can usually, they happen more often, once a year, every couple of years, something like that. Yeah.
What about Supermoon?
Yeah, supermoon. So supermoon is when the moon is closer than, so like the moon is not always the same distance away either. It's a more elliptical orbit. And so in particular, and sometimes it's in closer areas than others.
What about harvest moons?
Harvest moon is a phenomenon that has to do with the particles in the atmosphere and how the light travels through it. So it looks bigger, but it's a not reflection. It's a refraction of light, so it looks larger, and it's also colored too.
Blood moon?
Blood moon, similar kind of thing, just has to do with the coloring of the dust and stuff in the atmosphere. Similar thing, yeah. Good. So, yeah, the moon does some interesting things, and the moon is super cool. I love the moon.